And good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here today. And Dairy NZ has been a supporter of the Rural Leaders Trust for a good number of years now. And it's just great to see people come into the programs that they have on offer and really grow and develop as they go through and go on to lead in their own farming businesses, but in the wider community. So yeah, fantastic to be here, and you're in for a treat because we have two really passionate people here that I'm certainly excited to be having a chat with today, and encourage you to use the chat function, and we'll try and get our questions across to Corrigan and Hamish once we've had a bit of a one-on-one chat for the first sort of 15 odd minutes. So firstly, Corrigan. Welcome, Corrigan. I see you're in a very appropriate place there that looks like the milking shed.
It is, yeah. Good morning, Jenny. It is coming to you live from my cow shed here in Golden Bay, the top of the South Island in New Zealand. So hi to everyone around the country and hi to people globally this morning who could be joining us at any strange time of the day or night. Look, thank you, everyone. I'm really looking forward to sharing with you today. So thanks for the introduction also, Chris. And as you mentioned, I didn't actually set out to study mental and behavioural health and the subject of pressure, as my final report is titled. It was actually something I discovered and started researching the subject of provenance and origin stories initially. And originally my motivation was actually born out of frustration. Frustration about the disconnect I could see between the efforts going into our own business and those of my peers around me to farm better and the rewards we were achieving. Efforts around higher environmental and animal welfare focus, the great expense invested to tread more lightly on the land, big efforts to build a better workplace like better rosters, for example. And I guess I was disillusioned, if I'm honest with you guys, because I felt like we were running harder to stand still, or perhaps worse, we were running harder and going backwards. So once out on the first part of my study, called the Global Focus Program, where you get a rapid exposure to global agriculture issues, I started to notice the same feeling everywhere. For a start, I couldn't really describe what that was. It was just an observation that many farmers were feeling under the pump too, and that change was real and it was fast. And at that point, the topic for me shifted to one actually around purpose and why, because I was observing all of these different global businesses, those clear on their purpose and why, they were doing better. They had more clarity, they had less distraction and concern. So, perhaps naively at the time, I thought that would be the answer to New Zealand dairy sector problems. But once I got out and started interviewing farmers, however, I started to see the anger and the frustration, and that's when the topic turned to trying to understand the emotion that I was encountering.
Yeah, that's great, Corrigan. And I know you, obviously with Nuffield, you have lots of travels and a huge opportunity to go and learn and just look in at how other people are experiencing what seems to be a similar thing that you saw around the world. Can you tell us a bit about how you went about gathering your information and who you visited and what you found?
Yeah, sure. So I used a process, and the other scholars alongside me from New Zealand may also touch on this. And the process was based on the concept of design thinking, called double diamond design. And in essence, it's about getting out for a start and doing a really big, wide look at what's going on. And then you reflect back in on what have been those big themes, and from that, what are the problems that you're kind of keen to research further. And we were then encouraged to go wide again with that problem statement and look as much as we could at the topic before then narrowing down to the key elements of research that I've framed up in my report. So for me, that was 8 weeks across the US, South America and Europe with the Global Focus Program alongside 7 other international scholars. And that gave us this wonderful broad overview. I then did 4 weeks in Ireland and the Netherlands, understanding origin branding and environmental pressure. And here's where I sort of started to get into the farmer psychology topic. Then last spring, I spent 5 weeks mainly in the US and Canada, and that was looking firsthand at pressure that farmers were under. And I was trying there to access research around farmer psychology, mental health, and the challenges that were confronting wellbeing.
Gosh, Corrigan, just listening to all that travel, we're in such a different world now, And look, I think you're really fortunate to have gotten all that travel before the COVID situation. So I was just reminiscing a little bit about what travel was all about listening to you, and hopefully we'll be back to traveling some more soon. But tell us a bit about what you found. I was really impressed with how you were able to take all your experiences and kind of condense that down into some very clear thinking. So tell us a bit more about what you found.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jenny. And I absolutely share those sentiments. I do feel very privileged too, sitting here today, looking back on what I did, throughout last year. So, but what I found and what was really interesting in the subject is that there's actually not much research out there around how farmers think. And I was in Ireland and talking with an Irish dairy farmer actually, and he steered me to look closer to home at our All Black story around pressure. And I've got a slide on that, if that slide could come up now for you to see. And this led me to the book Legacy by James Kerr. And that book's about All Black history. And as I was reading that, I was able to touch on a forensics or get exposed to a forensic psychologist by the name of Dr. Kerry Evans. And he'd developed the change in approach at the All Blacks around dealing with pressure. And Kerry was just finishing a book called Perform Under Pressure. And it was this that really helped me to frame up and explain my observations around farmer frustration and change. So Kerry has these 5 factors that he describes for us around pressure. The first one's uncertainty, high stakes, small margins, judgment, and fast change. And when you unpick the issues of global agriculture right now, these 5 factors do a wonderful job of framing them up. The interesting thing for farmers is we've spent a long time developing skill sets to manage uncertainty and high stakes and small margins. These are not new forces. It's the last 2 forces that I was seeing and hearing firsthand as I travelled that really interested me. So farmers were feeling judged, and they were feeling on the back foot with the rate of change occurring around them. The All Black story is really about the loss in 2007 in the quarter-final against France and that rebuilding that followed the shock exit and then the understanding that developed around what drives pressure. And they actually call it hot thinking, so it's heated, it's overwhelmed and it's tense and basically it's about getting out, it's about being under threat. And it was this emotional behaviour they worked to change in order to win the World Cup in 2011 and repeat in 2015. And they have a saying inside the team that great people make great All Blacks. And in other words, build the person and the game will follow. And that fascinated me when I related it to agriculture because everywhere I was seeing this wonderful technical innovation around the globe. But perhaps what was missing is that primary focus on developing the farmer at a thinking level. And it's that subject that I then began to unpick around global agriculture, but especially because for me it's very relatable, I feel, to what's happening here in New Zealand. So I have chosen to call it the pressure cycle, which you'll see come up on a second slide shortly. Increased pressure drives hot thinking, so that's heated and the overwhelmed and the tense I just talked about. And our natural response to that threat, which is encoded in our evolution, is to either fight or fright or freeze. And as Kerry calls it in his book, we go ape. That's aggressive and passive and escape behaviours, and we can all relate to those. The big issue with this natural response to threat is how it's perceived by others. Others may see us as being defensive, as not caring, or as running from a problem. And this is the social licence piece that we've all become so aware of. So that's just fueling that judgment further. And I guess if we think about essential freshwater reform, the zero carbon bill, the last election, they all created fast change in New Zealand agriculture. They created judgment and they created threat for farmers. So the thing about farmers is we've evolved to detect threat more readily than the general population. And I spent time with a brilliant farmer psychologist in the Midwest of the US, Dr. Michael Rosman. He calls it the agrarian imperative. And in essence, it's about that instinct to seek out the best land to farm and provide food for others, and then the protection that develops over maintaining this. So that drive to work the land and produce food is in the blood of farmers, and it pushes them to take risks in the pursuit of their farming objectives. And it also brings that deep sense of failure and depression if objectives are not met. Dr. Rosman's view is that there's some evidence that through common genetic markers and the selection over long periods of time towards certain behavioural traits, that farmers are programmed to want to hold on to their land at all costs, and therefore they've evolved to be more alert to threats than that's typical of the general population. And if they perceive their livelihoods are under threat, then many will work to a point of fatigue, and it's that predisposes them to the risks of depression. So it's that repeated episodes of alarm that exhaust our bodies and minds, and that reduces the production of beneficial hormones and leads us towards depression. The other key point for many farmers is that the farm is an annex of, and it's an inseparable part of a farmer's identity. And therefore, the threat and loss of the farming operation is incredibly stressful. And Dr. Michael Rosman considers that this stress is actually of a magnitude equivalent to the death of a parent and close to that of death of a child. So, that's serious stress. With pressure, we react and we react and we react, and it's this that predisposes us to greater risks of mental illness, and it's especially that one around if we don't have the wellness and the healthy thinking. And I guess here is really where the All Black story becomes relevant, Jenny. How can agriculture take a leaf out of the All Blacks playbook and get better at dealing with pressure? And as Michael Rosman says, it's our reaction to pressure that matters, and the reason I emphasise it is that I don't believe that the pressure is going away. We recognise the challenge humanity is putting on the planet, and when a significant part of the planet's occupied growing food for others, and there's some disconnection between where your food comes from and where you are, then it's very easy for that vacuum to be filled with misinformation. And social media and technology changing communication, they've been big drivers, I believe, in how farmers are feeling. So what I've tried to show with the paper is that thinking about how we think is actually really, really important right now. Historically, farmers' response to pressure around margin and uncertainty has been to grow. We just naturally push harder and harder. But what if changing regulatory environments constrain that? If we can't produce our way to success, then we need to think our way to it. And that's where, for me, Kerry Evans' work around performance under pressure is powerful for agriculture, in my opinion. Kerry Evans has a model called red and blue brain. Red brain's the hot thinking that I've already talked about. It's this fast thinking, it's emotion-based, and it comes from part of our brain connected to survival. So when under threat or pressure, we instinctively just go there. The challenge with that is it's not where we think our best. We don't think the clearest, and we don't make our best decisions. For this, we need that logic part of our brain, and unfortunately, this is naturally slower response. And so without us being kind of consciously aware of that bias to go red, we miss the opportunity for the blue brain, logic thinking. Kerry talks about how to develop this skill, which is to think about how we think, and it's called metacognition. And it's the skill that the ABs are focused on, to put expectations and the scrutiny and the consequences to one side when the pressure comes on, and focus on being aware and being clear and being on task. And it was this change in mindset that they credit with their winning. And I believe it's the change in mindset that will support the next opportunity being realised for New Zealand food and fibre sector. The challenge and what I've tried to do with this report is to tie that big picture together. So I started out, as I mentioned right at the start, worried about provenance, because I was really interested in how we were perceived in the market. To me, this perception is based around how we farm, and this is based around our actions that are directly motivated by how we're thinking. But if we're under pressure and we're unable to deal with this, are we thinking in a way that will create the best food and therefore support the best perceptions being created in the marketplace? So with this idea in mind, I created a model to describe what I mean. And I've called that model the resilience tree, because that's really what the subject is about. It's about building resilience to pressure. I also think the tree is quite symbolic for New Zealand cultural heritage of Tāne Mahuta and the god of the forest separating the earth from the sky and letting the light in. And healthy thinking under pressure is all about letting the light in and pushing out those dark thoughts. So the concept of the tree is that our trunk is our mind, and we need a strong trunk to support our branches, which is the actions we have with the world around us. Pressure is forcing on our branches, and we need a strong trunk to support this through healthy thinking. And then all of this is dependent on really strong roots, which are our well-being. You know, we don't see these, but they're essential to keeping our tree upright and feeding that healthy thinking. So in summary, my main message is we need to put how our farmers are thinking right at the heart of change in our food and fibre sector. We need to support them in developing tools and resilience and mindset first, before we overwhelm them with the technical challenges confronting us with things like water, climate change, and now, of course, COVID-19. So thanks, Jenny. That's a very quick opportunity to share my report with you, and I'm really looking forward to discussing it further.
Yeah, no, thank you, Corrigan. I think you've done an amazing job of taking sort of a technical view of what farmers are facing. We often think about it as technical, you know, we need to make change to this, that, and the other, and taking it into being, actually, it's a lot about people. And I think that your comment around, you know, the pressure's not going to end. We often don't know where the next pressure is going to come from. Who knew COVID was going to turn up on our doorsteps? That's a, you know, an amazing pressure situation for us all. So what are you thinking about using this knowledge? What do you think it means for farming leaders, policymakers, and those that are, you know, we look to lead us through change?
Yeah, well, look, I guess you're absolutely right. We didn't expect COVID, did we? And it has certainly tipped the world on its head. And I went and used the All Black example, I suppose, Jenny, is on purpose, because I think the first thing with this puzzle around pressure is we have to relate it to something that we understand. And we all witnessed the pain, and as a country we shared the pain, didn't we, of losing in the 2007 quarterfinal, and then we shared that joy of the subsequent wins. What I'm trying to say with leaders is, here's an example we already know that's worked in New Zealand of recognising what the issue was, which was pressure, recognising that it put people in a stage where they couldn't make smart decisions, they couldn't be themselves, in essence. And if we can take examples like that, and I credit FarmStrong, who I think personally have done a brilliant job. They've socialised this whole wellbeing piece, and I think you look at their stats that they show that there's a great uptake in farmer understanding. So I feel like, you know, we're already talking wellbeing, it's already a socialised subject, but I'm just not sure at a farmer leading and a planning level that we're starting to think about the environment we need to put our farmers in so they feel safe, so that they can subsequently make the best decisions in the business.
Yeah, no, and that's a big challenge. I guess that's your challenge to us, isn't it, as leaders? Because I'm sure people on this call here are farming leaders. The challenge is how to actually take that information on and to build on some of those initiatives, like you've referred to FarmStrong, which is helping to help people be resilient and in terms of their thinking and their mental well-being, to how do we build on that so that it really supports us to make the changes that we all want, to respond to the pressures and to make the changes that we want to, and feel in control, I guess. Corrigan, it's been really good. I'm just having a quick look at my time, and I'm wondering if there's some questions that, there we go, there's a question. If there's just one thing, Corrigan, if there's just one thing to focus on to achieve performance under pressure, what would that be? What's the one thing we should focus on?
Raising awareness for each of us of how we think. So this process for me, it dawned on me through going through it that I needed to think much more about how I think. And I took that, after reading that book, one step further. So I went to the States for 5 weeks, within a week of booking the airfare with no visits booked, and did a 5-week in-depth study tour by putting myself under pressure. And it worked really well. But the point is, once you start to become self-aware, that becomes incredibly powerful, because you start to take interest in, why am I thinking like this? Yeah. You start to notice habits and trends, and from there you can then get out and start to look for things to help you, because we're all different, and we're all going to have slightly different things that will help us.
Yes, it's that self-awareness, isn't it? In fact, I think we might be about to talk self-awareness with Hamish soon, so that's a nice little join there. just checking. We've got one here, Solace. Oh, that's Solace. Welcome, Solace. That's an old scholar there. Nice to see you. Well presented, he says. My challenge to you, the All Blacks probably have more intensive support than any other Kiwi citizen. How do we duplicate that support for farmers? Great question.
That is a great question. It is a great question. Yeah, I think if we, and look, I'm just sort of starting on this journey. So in the last couple of weeks, I've started to have the conversations with sector leaders and various people about what we can do. But if we look at agriculture, haven't we got a wonderful support network, an incredible support network, I think. And right now we're realising that it's a sector for us, primary sector, essential to the next couple of years of economic sort of success for our country. So I guess for me, this report's a bit of a call to arms to say that everyone's got to be thinking about this. This relates, you know, all the way through the production cycle, all the support networks that sit around farmers, particularly finance. And my time in the States showed me that the changes that they're making around their support for farmers around depression has been very much linked around understanding the understanding going into their financial sector and getting the right processes in place to support farmers that are in financial difficulties. So it's a great question, Solace, and I'd love to be able to spend another 15 minutes answering that one, but I'd say we all need to be involved.
He agrees. It's a good answer, Corrigan, so well done. Final question from me just before we sign off. We'll have a chance to talk with Corrigan again once we've heard from Hamish, but just your comment about what a great support system we have or infrastructure we have around agriculture in New Zealand. Is that something you observed when you often, you know, when you go to another country, you can look back and see all the bits that we have and identify the good things? Was that something that you observed that perhaps other countries didn't have that sort of infrastructure around farmers?
Yeah, I think so. And again, boy, I'd love to have 5 or 10 minutes to talk around that question. It's a great one, Jenny, because I think we take and we don't need for our whole sector to be cooperatively based, but we take the cooperative elements that bring the sharing of knowledge, that free sharing of knowledge, and shifting competition away from between farmers to looking out and looking global. We take that for granted in New Zealand, we really do. And you get out and you sort of peer back what's going on globally. And it was interesting again in the States and in Canada that some of the farmers were telling me the pressure that I'm feeling, it's coming from other farmers. It's not coming from, you know, the Toronto or Minneapolis or Chicago. It's coming from my peers around me. I don't feel that's the same in New Zealand. I think there's a sense of camaraderie. We've largely got each other's back, and we're all in this for the success of our country.
And that's, you know, that really is a great starting point. I agree with you. I think we've got a great foundation, and you've given us all a great challenge around how to build that thinking and that what you've learned into that foundation that we have in terms of a support system for the wider farming community. Right now, here's a question, Corrigan. At what stage of a farmer's career should this understanding or training be targeted? So you were talking about, you know, farming under pressure. So at what point is there like should we learn this right at the beginning? Is it something we wait till later, or is there like a sensitive period, a really important point to learn those skills?
Yeah, interesting question. I'm sitting here absorbed in what Hamish has been saying, Jenny, and I guess I think there's an example there that these skills around understanding your own thinking and being self-aware. You know, Hamish has flagged those as part of his team, and team awareness and individual awareness, you know, right through. So I'd say that they're really valuable the whole way through, aren't they? You know, we all think back to some of our first jobs and how we dealt with things that didn't go right or things that challenged us, and, you know, reflect back on those. If we'd had some of those skills about thinking about our thinking at that time, they might have been different outcomes. So to me, this concept of changing technology, changing communication styles and well-being is something that society in general is is raising and saying is really important. And while I've unpicked agriculture and that, and you know, the problem, it's a global problem, isn't it? As Hamish, you know, mentioned, with such quick feedback loops that we now have, and we're so exposed constantly to new forms of information, it's no surprise that we're all overwhelmed. So I'd say we start teaching our kids. You know, I'm talking to my 8 and 6-year-old about thinking about how they think.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. So it's not about what stage in your farming career. It's even before that, isn't it? These are skills that are valuable for everybody, and getting the opportunity to learn those really gives you a bit of a head start, I guess, as young adults. So I think there's this really lovely synergy between what you've been studying, Corrigan, and what Hamish has been studying. You know, you've got the future work environment and you've got the people within it. And both of these topics really come back to the people, and yet we're thinking about change and adaptation in agriculture and in the way we farm, but both of them, it's all about the people. So it's a really I really think that you guys have done a fantastic job in really exploring those and getting underneath. Now I can see another question here. This one is for Cogs. That must be you, Corrigan.
It would be.
It's a long one. Let me see. Okay. Along learning to think about how we think, do you think, three things, do you think we need to learn to define what we call pressure as people something we create our own? Sometimes we create our own treadmills with some unnecessary or not so high priority issues. So that's a very interesting question. Are we defining pressure correctly?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think again relates just to what we've heard from Hamish as well, with some of his points. One of the ones, if I sort of raised Farmstrong here, is I think they've done a really good job with the 5 kind of factors of well-being, and one of them is you just take stand back and smell the roses, just take some stock of actually. And maybe if each of us reflected on the last 7 weeks that's gone on, or 8 weeks now, I think everyone's had a bit of a chance to step back and kind of take stock, haven't we? And, you know, I know we've felt so privileged to be on a farm and well insulated. So, for me, Victor, your question is, I guess it's about us developing an ability to see through all of that noise that we've put in ourselves in, and into the things that are really important. And if you dig into Kerry Evans's book and his model of red and blue brain thinking, the thing that Victor's kind of mentioning, Jenny, is that concept of being overwhelmed. And to make good decisions under pressure is about clear thinking. So it's about, okay, what are the things I need to actually unburden myself here of, and start to reach into the toolbox of things to help you with that, which can be things like breathing and adequate sleep, and there's a heap of them.
The sleep one's a good one for dairy farmers with those early mornings.
Just change your milking intervals, Jenny.
Change the milking interval. Absolutely, we've got the answer for that. This is from Andrew. Are there practical ways you think about how you think, and how do you keep that in check when the pressure comes on? Because some of the stuff, it's good in theory, but when the really pressure comes on, it's like, what are your little tips that you've got that you actually use yourself?
That's a very, very good question, and why it's a good question is I don't get it right all the time. Because I've become a bit more self-aware naturally by doing the project, I now catch myself, but I don't always, you know, sometimes you'll be reflecting back after a day and think, well, actually, I didn't really go about that very well. I was heavily red brain, you know, and not blue brain thinking. And then there's other times when you just suddenly start to think something from quite a negative perspective, and you've caught it within 10 seconds and said, oh, I'm just not going to waste my time with that, and get back to it. I really enjoyed, Hamish, you had this point before, like give it 10 minutes and dump it. I thought, you know, there's a brilliant example where their team's obviously verbalised it. So, look, I'd like to say that I've got all the stuff nailed, Jenny, but by no means have I. I'm just now way more aware of the habits and the behaviours I've perhaps built not only into my own life and our families, but also our businesses, because of how I dealt with pressure. And as I kind of start to unpick that, I think we can, everyone can be happier, really.
Yeah, and it's that old sort of word of continuous improvement by the sounds of it, and having that self-awareness to be able to be aware in the first place, and then to make those changes and catch yourself and keep improving all along. And you're probably, although you say you're not always good at this, I'm sure you're a long way ahead of where some of us are when we're just sort of learning about this. So it's great that you're leading in this way, Corrigan. So well done. Right, I'm going to do one check. Both speakers have touched on the soft skills of business. They highlight how important it is. Do we spend enough time learning them?
I think, Jenny, something I used in my paper a little bit to kind of try and frame my thinking was that I launched into Nuffield looking for technical sort of problems or technical opportunities, and I discovered that they were more social problems or social opportunities. And I think that's, where Amanda's going with that is that looking around the world in agriculture, we're masters in a lot of the technical stuff. We've got screeds of research and all the whiz-bang stuff, but it's the stuff up here and the stuff about, as Hamish has said, about how, we include our teams and how we grow people. That's where the real opportunity lies.
That's a great opportunity for us to not only be leaders in the technical side of farming, but now we've got the challenge that you've given us to be leaders in the people side of farming, which together would give us awesome results. Right, I'm going to call it a day there. I can see Chris is itching to give us a little wrap up, and I really would like to thank both Hamish. I've just enjoyed fascinating talking to both of you. Well done on great pieces of work and then on sharing them with a wider audience. So you're well done, and thanks so much for taking the time. I'll now hand back to Chris, who's going to give us a wrap and sign us off.
So Hamish and Corrigan, thank you both very much for your insights, and ladies and gentlemen, for joining us from around the world in a number of cases. There's a saying in New Zealand that goes, "He aha te mea nui o te au, hei tangata, hei tangata, hei tangata." And it comes from an old Māori chief who, when asked what was the most important thing in the world, he answered, "It is the people, it is the people, it is the people." And I think really just touching on that last question, gentlemen, you've highlighted the importance, the X factor in all of our businesses in terms of focusing on the people, and actually it's not even soft skills necessarily, but it's smart skills. And if we can really zero in on that, we can multiply our impact, which is what leadership is all about. But equally, as farmers and growers and agribusiness people, I think if we were asked that question that the old Māori chief was asked, we would pretty quickly follow it up with it's our environment as well as being equally important. And so we're delighted, looking forward now to invite all of you to join us again on Tuesday, the 26th of May, where we will have two scholars presenting on our environment. Cameron Henderson will be looking at farming energy and how we can get ourselves closer to the net zero carbon targets of 2050. And Hamish Marr will be looking at a key question around, can we farm without glyphosate? So again, really important questions. All of this takes our knowledge and our farming practice forward. So gents, Jenny, thank you all very much for your contribution today. We'd also like to thank our other strategic partners, but particularly Dairy NZ for facilitating today. Hamish, Corrigan, well done, gentlemen. Thank you very much.